Good evening. Welcome to tonight's shir. This is Parshas Shoftim, and it is the night going into the second day of Rosh Chodesh, Elul. So I want to share with you, first of all, something which came my way in a very interesting way, and that is that I had a reference to Lekutei Sichos, to Chelik Chav Daled, page 342, and by mistake, in my mind, it was to Chelik Chof, page 342, and I was writing to my colleague that there's something, the reference is not the correct reference. And I realized I looked at the wrong volume. Meanwhile, as I looked at the wrong volume, I found something which of particular interest to me, a comment of the Rebbe on the Siddur, on the Nusach HaTfilah, which I had not quoted in the Siddur, wasn't aware of it at the time. So I'm going to share that with you now. So this is from the Sichos of Tovshin Lamed Ches. And it was that winter that the Rebbe said the Sichos, he spoke from his room because of he wasn't well enough to speak to be in public. And those Sichos were subsequently muga by the Rebbe, and they were later included at the back of Chelik Chof. So the winter of Tovshin Lamed Ches Sichos are printed in the back of volume Chof of Lekutei Sichos. Now, in Parshas Chayes Tzara, the Rebbe talks about Yaakov ve'Esav Hamurim beParsha. There is an Esav who is an Esav within the Parsha, rather than the Esav who is lurking out there in a negative way. So in the Ha'orah, which you have on the screen, the Rebbe says the following. In the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, talking about the Nusach HaTfilah for Rosh Hashanah, says that when it comes to the end of the middle bracha of Musaf, which is Zichroinus, so it has here, as you see on the screen, V'akedas Yitzchok Lazaroi Hayoim Berachamim Tizkei. The Akedah should be remembered for the seed of Yitzchak. Now, Nusach Ashkenaz has a problem with that because they could also be construed as being for Esav, because Esav is also Zara Shel Yitzchak. And in the Yomim Noiroim, we have to be very particular. There shouldn't be any ambiguity in our tefillah. So that's why the Nusach Ashkenaz has V'akedas Yitzchak L'Zara Shel Yaakov Hayoim Berachamim Tizkei. Despite that apprehension, and the Alter Rebbe Siddur, and that is so in the Pri-Eitz Chaim, and the Siddur HaArizal, the Nusach is written V'akedas Yitzchok L'Zarei Hayoim Berachamim Tizkei, without qualifying Zara Shel Yaakov. So far, says the Rebbe, Shemizeh Mashma, that Esav Eine Nechshav Mizare Shel Yitzchok Klal, the idea that
Esav audio off for a minute.
No,
I can't hear anything.
I can't.
Oh, that's two of us.
The fact that Esav is not considered Zara Shel Yaakov, Zara Shel Yitzchok, is so obvious. So whereas Nusach Ashkenaz does see a bit of a doubt, but according to the Arizal, there's no shaykhus. Esav has got nothing to do with Zara Shel Yaakov, Zara Shel Yitzchok. Therefore, we don't worry when we say this on Rosh Hashanah. You see this as sometimes there's a Torah said by a Rebbe more in a way of a tefillah, to interpret in a way that's how it should be Torah, to kind of dismiss any claim of Esav to the merit of Yitzchak. As Rebbe is saying, according to the Arizal, Esau has got nothing to do with to be Zera of Yitzchak. Now, why that's the Rebbe's comment here. In my comments on the Siddur, I have a quote from Rabbi Menachem Azariah Mifano. He was a contemporary of the Arizal, also Mekubal, and he says, why don't we want to mention Yaakov here? Because the emphasis on Rosh Hashanah is on Midas Hadin, as we see that there are three who conceived Rosh Hashanah, three tzidkonios, and they are Sora, Rochel, and Chano. So Sora conceived Yitzchok as the union of Gevura. Rochel conceived Yosef, who again was a very powerful person, and Chano conceived Shmuel, and Shmuel, he says, was an exceptionally powerful, strong person. He was a Maimid Melochim and Moidid Melochim. He appointed Yishol, then he took him down, then he appointed David, and then with the story with Agag. So Shmuel was a very strong person, and because of this, David HaMelech sees in him this power. He says, Moshe Shmuel, he puts him on the same pedestal, same level as Moshe and Aaron. So as Yaakov is Midas Harachamim, and because on Rosh Hashanah the emphasis is on Midas Hadin rather than on Midas Harachamim, therefore we don't use the words Zaresh Yaakov Hayom Berachim Tizker. We leave out the word Liyaakov and we attribute it to Yitzchak. So that's the Ramban Mifano, his comment why Nusach Sfard and Arizal, etc., didn't accept the modification of Nusach Ashkenaz. Of course, he doesn't mention the Arizal, he's just talking about Nusach Sfard. Right, let's move on to the next question. Someone asked me this past week, when you are writing, let's say, an article, and it mentions Avodah Zarah, do you also have to use Elokim, or can you write the word in full with a hey? Possibly that could be for other words. Now, so when we daven, we say Hashem's name properly. But I'm not talking about Yud Kei Vav Kei, which we say Adni, but generally we pronounce Keil, Alekim, Shin Dal Yud. We pronounce them. But when it comes in conversation, even in good conversation, we will say Alekim, Keil, Havaya, etc. So here's the question: when it comes up a pasuk which has Alekim Acherim, should you say Alekim Acherim, or you can say it with a hey? Because after all, you're talking about Avodah Zarah. You don't have to respect Avodah Zarah. That's the question. So here you have on the screen from the Kutasiches a short letter of the Rebbe. Murgal b'fi ha'olam, in response to your ha'arim, Murgal b'fi ha'olam, it is common in colloquial conversation to say Elikim acherim, b'kuf, with a kuf. After Medubar, Avodah Zarah, even though the focus is Avodah Zarah. So who cares if you're going to be not respectful? V'ulai yesh lekasher im pirush Ramban devorim chof aleph chof beis k'nan chulu shechoshash chulu. Perhaps we can connect this with the words of the Ramban. Now this is the coming week's Sedre in Parshas Kiseitze, and we have here a mitzvah. If a person is punished with a death sentence, he should be hanged on a tree, on a gallows. Rashi says, all those who are killed by best, and Ramban disagrees. He says, no, it's only those who are guilty of blasphemy, etc. Avodah Zarah or blasphemy. In other words, it's got to do with kilul asalikim. That's where their punishment would include hanging. Even then, the Torah says, do not leave the nivlosa, do not leave the dead body hang on the tree overnight. Rather, you should bury him on the same day. Kikila laselikim tolu. So how do you explain the curse of Hashem is hanging? What exactly do those words mean? Goes further. So Rashi mentions a mashal of a king and who had a brother who's a gangster, a bandit. And the bandit has been arrested for a big, terrible offenses and being put to death. But he's identical to the king. So if his body is left hanging on the tree, people will say that the king is hanging. What's that got to do with anything? So Rashi says, from this pasuk, we're learning the mitzvah of kavura, of a person who died or should be buried. Why? Because the human image is Tzelem Elikim, is in Hashem's image. And therefore, you see a human body being disgraced, it will somehow reflect a disgrace on Hashem. That's the way Rashi learns. The Ramban's not happy with that. He says, "What do you look at? People don't know what Hashem looks like to say, oh, they'll see a body disgraced, think about Hashem." And he says this is limited to the Poshtep shot, is limited to a person who was put to death because of his blasphemy and etc. So he's kilalaselikim tolu. Anyone passes by, they'll see why is this body hanging? Because he had been arrogant against Hashem, he cursed Hashem. So then that perpetuates his crime, his klola to Hashem, by the fact that his body is there, is going to be perpetuated. Therefore, don't leave it there. Take it away before nightfall. That's the way the Ramban learns. Okay, and then the moshul of the two brothers. He says it's a soid, but then towards the end of the Ramban, he quotes the following: because there is the mitzvah of burial, and not to leave a body hanging. Earlier he talks about the sons of Shaul who were put to death at the insistence of the Givonim, but now he's talking about Yeshua at a particular moment had conquered 5 kings of Canaan of various cities, and he had then, after he had captured them and disgraced them, then they were hanged, and then he took them down and buried them. What was the urgency to bury them? Why couldn't he leave them hanging? So he writes like this, Ramban: Min halav hazeh is for this reason, this negative commandment, that Yeshua buried the kings of Canaan on the same day. The fact their crime was not blasphemy. When you see the king of Hebron hanging, you don't say, "Oh, it's because he was arrogant towards Hashem." He was an enemy of the Jewish people, but it had nothing to do with Kila Lasadikim. So why was the urgency to bury him? According to the Ramban, it's only because of a reflection of Kila Lasadikim perpetuating the Kalola. But I didn't quote on the screen, a dead body left out is broadcasting, is radiating tumor, and therefore it should be buried. So that's the other reason. And now comes the reason which is relevant to our discussion. Oy shechoshash lekila las elikim min hamoshel shnei achim shasher pirashti. And this is what the Rebbe refers to in his letter. Canaan shechoshash. So somehow, which I'm going to admit, I don't have a clear understanding, but somehow there seems to be the following: that you've got the 2 brothers, one is the king and one is the gangster, and when there is a disgrace of the gangster, it somehow has also a reflection, a negative reflection on the king. Therefore, we don't want to disgrace the gangster so as not to disgrace the Hashem. And therefore, when we have a mention to Elikim Achedim, although we're talking about Avodah Zarah, but since the name Elikim is also used for Hashem, therefore we would be careful to treat this name with respect, even though it's used in the context of Avodah Zarah. So this comes to mind like this, that in many, it says in the Gemara, Kol Tznusa Asura, Chus Min Tznusa Avodah Zarah. It'll be many times we find in the Gemara the Davka take words of Avodah Zarah and distort them to make it in a scoffing way. For example, I'll just tell you, there's the 25th of December. It's called in Yiddish Kratzmach. Kratzmach means scratch my back. That's what they literally. They took the words and distorted it a little bit, as you have in the Gemara various words, names of Avodah Zarah, which they distorted to make it in a disgraceful way. It's Bamed Varim Amurim when it is a name clearly for Avodah Zarah. So then we say Yashki Pandrik, etc. Yeah. So these are all said in a mocking way, perhaps. But when it comes to this very same name, which is a title for Hashem, and it's now being used for Avodah Zarah, so then we're going to be careful and not treat it disgracefully, because it has also reflection on the Eibishter. That's the way I understand how the Rebbe is using this Ramban, and why he buries the kings of Canaan, because you want to bury the bad twin, not to give a negative reflection of the good counterpart. Let's take a look at someone has put something here on the chat. Here further. Okay. Let's move on. Okay. Our third question is about Kriyas HaTorah. Is what happens if you hear Kriyas HaTorah and it's not Parshas HaShavua? How much of a problem is that? And the particular application, the most likely thing is where you, between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, during after Pesach or after Shavuos. So now we have here a comment. Someone asked me this. He read in the Sikha from Tovshin Memvov 40 years ago, last Shabbos, and the Rebbe says the following: in Kriyas HaTorah, in addition to the fact that you have a parsha designated for each Shabbos, but overall there's the union of Kriyas HaTorah. As we find in Poskim, although it's not so well known, that reading a parsha in Torah, with the reading of a parsha in Torah, whatever parsha it may be, you're Yotze Kriyas HaTorah. So he's asking, the Rebbe is saying that there's a certain flexibility, perhaps. It doesn't matter whether you read Parshas. If you read last Shabbat Parshas Rei, you read Parshas, I don't know, was Chanan or Parshas Lech Lecha. Nicht das gefährlich, yeah? That seems to be, there's a certain flexibility. I seem to recall that in some communities, when there would be a chasana, they would do Kriyas HaTorah, a different Kriyas HaTorah, not the regular parsha, just the cover the chos. So this fellow is asking if there is that flexibility. Yotze Kriyas HaTorah, whatever parsha you hear. If so, why do people make a whole fuss when they traveled from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz, etc., to make up the missing parsha? To which I said there's two inyonim. Yotze Kriyas HaTorah is one thing. And then there's another thing, that you want to have the full repertoire, the full set of parshas. These are two separate things. One is the mitzvah Kriyas HaTorah. One is your own. Having gone through all the sedras of that year, so I looked around. I find here there's a sefer called Yom Tov Sheni Kol Chosoi, which is an excellent sefer dealing with lots of details about people traveling here and there, 1 day, 2 days, but also as a result is also the whole idea of the difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, and for Kriyas HaTorah has got to do with when the Achrish Pesach is on the Shabbos, whether it's considered Shabbos or it's considered Yom Tov. Good. So Rav Shlomo Zalman is quoted that on those years where there is there's a difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, the Bnei Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael are not mechuyev to make minyonim to have the weekday the Chutz La'aretz kriya. He mentions there that some people were said in the name of Ramosha Feinstein that they should have every week another minyan for the Chutznikim to keep up the Chutznik kriya, like they keep in 2 days Yom Tov, should they also keep the kriya of Chutz La'aretz. Shlomo Zalman says there's no such, and even Ramosha is not really clear he ever said such a thing. If you want, you can do the first Shabbos. This is in many places in Eretz Yisrael. The first Shabbos after Pesach, when there's a change, they will make a minyan in a side room, and they'll do the entire Parsha Rishona, and Kohen will have the whole Parsha, and then Kohen of the second Parsha. And then they can just join the rest of Eretz Yisrael in their Kriyas HaTorah without a problem. So Reb Shlomo Zalman says it's not a chiyuv, but it's a it's imroitzim. So, in answer to the question, how important is it? Person heard Kriyas HaTorah, but not his Kriyas HaTorah. How important? It's not so important. Having said that, there is, however, what happens if our whole community didn't have Kriyas HaTorah for some reason. We had in COVID, there was a situation, people didn't have Kriyas HaTorah. Could be, whatever it may be, the reason. So then we have here in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Kuf Lamed Hey, Kriyas HaTorah, the Ramah writes, Im bitlu Shabbos achas, Kriyas HaParsha b'tzibur, if one Shabbos, what the circumstances were that they didn't have Kriyas HaTorah, the Shabbos habo, Kohen Lois HaParsha, Im HaParsha, Hashayeches Lois HaShabbos. So the next week we'll read the missed Parsha, together with the parsha which is for that week. So the concept, what I'm bringing this here is the concept of not missing a parsha it has got its source. It's not a chiyuv, but for tzibur it's something which they should be doing. In that itself, if this Shabbos we want to make up for missing a kriya in Parshas Re'eh, so then there's two ways of doing it. One is to take Rishon and Sheni of Re'eh for Kohen, Shlishi and Revi for Levi, and then the fourth Aliyah would be a part of Parshas Re'eh and part of Shoftim, and like we do whenever we have two seders joined. That's one way of doing it. And that approach very much brings out the point which the Rebbe is saying in the Sikha, that the connection of the Parsha to this Shabbos is not so rigid. Others are a bit more concerned about this, and therefore they say, similar to what we said just now, if they want to be mashlim Parshas Re'eh this Shabbos, you'd call up Kohen and you'd read with Kohen the whole of Parshas Re'eh until Sheni in Parshas Shoftim, and then from there you continue regular aliyahs of Parshas Shoftim. All right, let's move on. So here's a common situation where it's only listen, but if there's two chiyuvim in the same shul, and so they make an arrangement. Both want to daven for the yomit. So one says, so they say one will do till after Chazar Sashad, and then they'll switch over. The other one will do Ashri Volotzion. So someone writes to me that he heard that there's a problem with that because the Chazan on the second tefillah after Volotzion says, Tiskabel Tzloisin of Usain, may the prayers be accepted. But if he wasn't the Chazan for Chazar Sashatz, so then what's he saying? Tiskabel Tzloisin. So my initial reaction was, I think I'm going to stay with that, is that it's not really a problem. Because the Chazan is a representative of the Tzibur. And the tzibur can, at a given point, switch over. Instead of this one representing us, This we're representing us. So when the Chazan says Tiskabot Sloislim V'usin, does he mean the Chazar Sashatz exclusively? He's talking about Shemon Esrei, and we all daven Shemon Esrei. That's when, all right, that's the way I know. But I looked around today, and I see here in the Piskei Tshuvos, he gives a reference to the Gesher HaChaim from Michal Tukachinsky, who wrote a sefer all about Inyonim B'Vavelus, and he writes the following. Now, this idea of switching over is mentioned in Mishnah Berurah in Siman Kuf Lamed Beis. That's where it mentions that Shchonoch talks about Kaddish Yosef, and there's a whole hierarchy in communities where only one person says Kaddish at a time. Then becomes a whole politic: who is going to get this Kaddish, that Kaddish? There would be a whole way of sharing out. You live here, you don't live here. Who you're saying Kaddish for? The whole parsha, and the Mishnah Berurah put together. He calls it Ma'amar Kaddishin, a whole article about Kaddish. In that Ma'amar Kaddishin, he mentions this minhag of switching over, that one Chazan just does Chazar Sashatz, and the other one does Asher Volitzin. But that's as much detail as the Mishnah Berurah goes into. Here, the Gesher HaChaim, Dr. Kaczynski, he says, what's the yichus of going for Volitzin? That's because of the Kedusha. Volitzin's got the Kedusha. And he says, therefore, if a person goes for the Omid for Asher Volitzin, and he doesn't do the Kedusha out loud, like you have in Litvish Shuls, yeah. So if you don't do it out loud, and you're not going to be prompting the tzibur to say together Kodesh Kodesh, and the same thing with Baruch Kavod, if so, what's the point of you going for the Omid? With what are you a chazan? With what are you galvanizing the tzibur? And therefore, if you're not galvanizing the tzibur for anything, so that the Kaddish Tiskabel belongs to the first chazan. So this comment which he said, this is what Rav Tukachinsky is saying. Very interesting. So as I said, I'm not convinced that this is okay, the imperative, because you're chazan on behalf of the tzibur, because it's Tiskabel Sloisen of the tzibur. Now, go further. In the Piskei Tshuvos, where he brings this, and he says, what's so special about the Volitzin? Because it has Kedusha. And this he quotes the Tukachinsky, Gesher HaChaim. Then he adds another thing, that in Volitzin, there's Hashem's name comes up 18 times. Now, due to constraints of time, I did not sit down and count the number of times Hashem's name comes up in Volitzin, but he says there's 18 Azkoris. And the 18 times Hashem's name in Volitzin correspond to the 18 brachas of Shemon Esrei. And there are other exalted tefillos in Volitzin, and it says in the Gemara that the world is sustained by Kedusha de Sidra. So very unusual, because usually in Piskei Tshuvos, everything he has a source. And this he comes up as an alternative. Gesher HaChaim says it's imperative that you say the Kedusha aloud. He says, it seems to be saying, no, it's okay. You're saying 18 Azkoros, and this is Shemon Esrei. That's what he seems to be saying. All right, so there is the complaint which was said has got a source. On the other hand, as I said, I feel that it's nish geferlach, that there is a toyeles being a chazan for a Volitzin, even if you don't say the Kedusha aloud. The reason why we don't say Kedusha aloud, that's just another discussion. And I may have once mentioned this in the Shiurim, the following, that it's quoted in the Siddur, my comments on the Siddur, that it comes the Birchas Krishma in Yotzer Oir. So there we tell a story. We talk about first of all, we talk about the celestial beings as in the sun and the moon. Then we say Tisbarach L'Netzach, we talk about the Malachim. And then as we talk about the Malachim, we say how the Malachim say Kodesh. And they say Baruch. So we tell a story. And then we come back to Yotzer Moedes. That's the context there. So we've told the story. Then it comes to Chazar Sashatz, So we say Kedusha together. We're saying Kedusha together with the Malachim. We say Naklishach, we have Yachad, Kulam Kedusha L'choy Shaleshu. We're saying it together with them. Okay. And it comes to Volotzian, we kind of say, Yata Kodesh, Yoshev Tilus Israel, and you are holy with the praise of the Eden. And we start with Korazel Zaviyom Kodesh Kodesh. We start talking about Kedusha. We've forgotten about the Malachim. It's as if we've kind of kidnapped the whole Kedusha. We've taken it for ourselves and forgot about the Malachim. So the Zohar says the Malachim, if they know about it, they'll be concerned. First, they came in just as reporters telling our story. Then they became partners, and now they've forgotten about us. So for that reason, says the Zohar, not to make too much of a noise of the Kedusha and Ovolatzin. So, however you learn the Zohar, I'm sure those who say it loud also know the Zohar. But that's the reason for not in Chassidish communities, the Kedusha Ovolatzin isn't made allowed. All right. So, Koponim, so Chazen switching over, can you say it to Calvin's listen? The most he can, but yeah. Right. So here, someone asked me in the Israeli Chabad Siddur, it has several times the word chasdoi. It says Yadgish hasamech shel chasdoi. You should stress the samech of the word chasdoi. And he's asking, what's it mean, stress? Because in Hebrew we have mil'el al milra, the last syllable, second last syllable. What does it mean, this stress on the word on the samech of chasdoi? So I decided it's worth exploring this a little bit. So we have the following. This comes from the Rebbe's Haggadah, the Rebbe's biur on the Haggadah. Towards the end of the Haggadah, we have Hallel, and on this the Rebbe brings the Yerushalmi, quoted in the Rif. Ki lo'olam chasdoi, sorich lahatiz ki lo'olam chasdoi. You have to stress ki lo'olam chasdoi. The lo'ilishtama ki lo'olam. It shouldn't sound like ki lo'olam, like the world has. The gam samach shel chasdoi, and also to stress the samach of the word chasdoi. So let's now, the Rebbe has given us a source, and this is really, in a large way, what the Rebbe is doing in his Haggadah, in his biur on the Haggadah. He is bridging the gap, should we say, from the literature of halacha, etc., literature of Pardes, and it's showing how it connects with the Nusach Haggadah, with the Tefillah of the Haggadah. And so here he has a source about this Ki L'Olam Chasdei, Yerushalmi. So he quotes this. Okay, so let's read the Yerushalmi as it is quoted in the Rif, in the I think third Perek of Brachos. Reb Levi v'Rebbi Evu de Min Chayfa v'Shem Rebbi Sisi says, Sorich lahatiz zayin shel leman tizkuru. When you say in Shema, when you say tizkuru, you should stress the zayin. Okay? Reb Yoino v'Shem Reb Chisda Omar Sorich lahatiz ki lo'olam chasdei. You should be stressing in the words ki lo'olam chasdei. What stress do you need to do? So then there's a Rashi on the margin of the Rif. Tzorich lahatis going to loilish dama ki lo'olam v'chein tzorich lahatis samach shel chasdei. Without Rashi, you could have said the stress is on the word ki. Tzorich lahatis ki lo'olam chasdei, not ki. But then Rashi adds also the samach of chas. This is what the Rebbe is quoting, the gam samach shel chasdei for the Rashi in the Rif. You look in here on the bottom of the page, we have here from the Knesset Hagdolah, which is like a collection on the Shulchan Aruch, of comments on the Shulchan Aruch. Chaim Ben-Venisti, if I'm not mistaken. So he says, he quotes the Rashi that's from the Rif, that tzorich lahat is ki lo'ilon chasdoi. Yeah, you shouldn't be like ki lo'ilon chasdoi. And nire midevorov the tarti ba'ino. So from the Rashi's comment, we understand there's two emphases. Lahat is a yud chi, to stress the yud. The lo yehei nire ke'oimer ki lo'ilon. Shouldn't be seen like one word. Ki lo'ilon. That's how lahat is. Shein is lahat is samach shel chasdoi, to stress the samach. Shelo yehi nire yehiroeh ka'oimer chasdoi bezayin. It shouldn't sound like a chazdoi. Just to make it stress, it should be a samach. So it's interesting. Vaishma, the man tizkeru, it shouldn't be tizkeru. And by chazdoi, it should be chazdoi, not chazdoi. Okay. And he refers to the commentary of his brother on the Yerushalmi. If I'd like, may as well share the opportunity, take the opportunity to share my shver, Nachman Sudak Allah Shalom, who by the Seder night, he would relive the Sidorim which he was present by the Rebbe, and so by Hallel, it was alternating. Okay, that was approximately the tune. Right. Someone is commenting that the Tzimach Tzedek says Kedusha Volotzian is not said aloud. I believe I'm going to have to look that up. Okay, what else do we have for today? Okay, there's a fine gentleman who I met in Los Angeles who's a Sephardi or Israeli, and therefore there are certain things which for Ashkenazim are really not an issue, but for Sephardi pronunciation they do become an issue. And that is when it comes to a komets. So, as you may know, Sephardim generally pronounce a komets as we do a patach, as a ah. But if the komets is what's called the komets cotton, which means that it should have been a choilon and it's been diminished to a komets, then that remains o rather than ah. So a Sephardi will per se kol davar, because the word kol comes from koil. So koil, the koilon was diminished because of a hyphen. So it's diminished to become kol, but it's not going to be kal davar. Yeah. So here's a question on the word shomro nafshi ki chosedoni. In Tehillim, chapter 86, shomro nafshi, is it for Sephardi? Is it shamra nafshi or shomra nafshi? This is his question. And so I looked around, and first I saw it's a lot of confusion here. But then I took the Sefer of Rabbi Shmuel Heber, soll sein gesund, and he very tersely, he says there are two ways of understanding this sentence, and that makes a difference to the way you pronounce it as far as the pronunciation. Is Shomro Nafshi, oh Hashem, protect my soul? Or is it saying, Shomra Nafshi, my soul has been observant and guarded your mitzvahs? Totally different meanings. I looked up in the Tivs Hashem translation of Rabbi Mangel, he says the former, Shomra Nafshi, protect my soul. But there's another way of reading it, Shomra Nafshi, my soul has been guarding your mitzvahs, Ki chosedoni, because I am pious. So let's read. He brings from the Ibn Ezra. Yesh oimrim ki shomra po'al over. It's a verb in the past. Was zochro Yerushalayim. Ki nafshi shomra masheroi lishmoy. My soul has been guarding, observing what it had to do, and therefore ad hayosi chosid, and we come to the level of piety. Then he quotes from Yehuda ben Bilom. No, it's shomra nafshi. It's not a shmoyer nafshi. God, it's a request. Guard my soul. And as a result, that will make a difference in the pronunciation and the shavo, etc. So it's the same word, and as I say, Ashkenazim makes no difference to us. It does actually, because when you're davening, you should know what you're saying, and so now you know there's two pirushim. Yeah, I've been often asked why is it in the Alter Rebbe Siddur he has about 6 or 8 times two nuschos. For example, Babosko loisosur. Well, al tosir. Which one if you're only going to say one, why did you put the other one? So my suggestion is the following: that in actual davening you can only say one. So you have to check one or the other. When it comes to kavon, you can have kavon on both. Lois it will not go astray. Will not be removed. Altos is a request. You can have in mind both. So here also, Shamra Nafshi Chazidoni, you can have in mind both kavanas. I'm going to finish off. I'm going to finish off a little bit early. We have Ma'ariv at 9:30, so I will have a few minutes to be able to get to Ma'ariv in time. So if you remember, 2 weeks ago, I'd spoken about I was checking my tzitzis, and in the note I saw how the tzitzis had unraveled. And as a result, I stopped wearing that talis because unraveled tzitzis are as if they were not kosher tzitzis. And if it's down there in the knots in on the braid, then that would make the tzitzis pos. So, and then, because it is imperative that tzitzis have to be braided, have to be twisted, shazira, moshzer. So now, one of our listeners, Rabbi Potash from somewhere in San Francisco. So he pointed out to me that in the Ha'oris Rabbi, the late Rabbi Bistritsky of Tzfas, he put together 2 volumes of the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch with comments. And later his son, Malamoker, Rebborche, soll sein gesund, he did it on Hilchos Shabbos, and recently published an excellent 2-volume set on Shin Chov Ches, thereabouts. But meanwhile, here's the comment of Rabbi Levi Bistritsky. So he wants to say the following. When it says that when the tzitzis have unraveled, they're not kosher, that's when it's made just of two threads. And they've been twisted over one another, and now they've unraveled. But if it's made of 8 strands, as we have, that's a common tzitzis nowadays, so then the fact that they are unraveled within each strand, but because they are largely the two main bodies are twisted one over the other, therefore they're still kosher. I saw the Piskei Teshuvos also has a similar observation. Again, that which is unraveling means that's no longer kosher. That's only if it's entirely unraveled, but if it's within each side of the 2 main bodies of the twisted tzitzis, if within them they are unraveled, then the tzitzis are still kosher. I'm going to finish off with this. Wish you all a good chodesh and a ksiva v'chasima toiva, and we should have a shnas geula. Mashiach tzidkenu amato me'asor atfach.
Und